Imagine this: you've spent your entire life hearing half-truths about love, desire, and power. Everywhere you turn, society feeds you a script about how relationships should work, what women want, and what men should be. But what if I told you that script was incomplete? That beneath the layers of tradition, culture, and silence, there's a hidden story, one that most people will never dare to uncover. Now pause for a moment. What if Socrates, the barefoot philosopher of Athens, actually held the key to understanding this missing piece? What if buried in his relentless questions is the secret to seeing women and yourself through a lens so sharp it cuts through centuries of illusion? That's what we're diving into today. And I promise you, if you stay with me, you won't leave this video the same person. So here's the hook. What do women truly desire? And what role does power play in their silence? This question is older than history itself, but rarely asked honestly. It's dangerous, subversive, and for many deeply uncomfortable. But if you're still here, that means you're ready to face the kind of truth that doesn't just change your mind, it changes your life. Socrates never wrote a single book, yet his voice shaped all of Western philosophy. He questioned leaders, poets, and ordinary people with equal courage. And yet there was one subject so charged, so volatile, that even he approached it through layers of myth and dialogue: the nature of women's desire and the invisible power they carry. His own wife, Xanthippe, was described as sharp, fiery, and relentless. People dismissed her as difficult. But ask yourself this: would a man obsessed with truth choose a partner who constantly challenged him, unless he knew there was something to learn in that fire? Here's where it gets interesting. Ancient Athens demanded that women be silent, modest, obedient in public. But behind closed doors, in family and intimacy, in the shaping of sons and citizens, they held dominion. Quiet power, soft authority, influence that didn't roar but whispered. And whispers, my friend, can shape destinies. Fast forward to today. Isn't the same pattern still alive? From boardrooms to bedrooms, there's an invisible current running through our lives, shaping choices and steering emotions, even if we don't call it by name. Psychologists like Carl Jung gave it a name: the anima, the unconscious feminine living inside every man. It inspires, it seduces, it confuses, and if ignored, it controls. So the real question isn't just what do women want? It's this: are we truly relating to the women in our lives, or are we trapped, dancing with projections we don't even recognize? And that's just the beginning. Because once you glimpse this hidden structure, once you admit that silence isn't absence but strategy, you'll start to see relationships' power and even your own desires in a way you can never unsee. Stay with me, because this journey is only getting started. Let's go deeper. If you really want to understand the hidden dynamics of desire and power, you can't just look at history, you have to look at yourself. Ask this: how much of what you believe about women love, or even your own masculinity, was chosen by you? And how much of it was handed down through culture, movies, family, and centuries of silence? Socrates once said, "Know thyself." But here's the twist: knowing yourself isn't only about your thoughts, your goals, or your career. It's about realizing how much of your inner world has been shaped by a feminine force you may not even see. The anima, as Jung called it, is that unconscious feminine within every man. Ignore it and it rules you from the shadows. Acknowledge it and you begin to reclaim your freedom. Think of it this way. Have you ever fallen in love with someone who felt strangely familiar? Not just attractive, but hauntingly known, like you'd met them before in another life. Alain de Botton once said, "We fall in love not with those who are right for us, but with those who feel familiar." Familiar because we're not only looking at them, we're searching for what's missing within ourselves. And here's the dangerous part. When you don't know this truth, you keep repeating the same cycles. Attraction, confusion, resentment, longing, over and over again. You chase someone because they spark something deep inside, but you don't see that what they awaken is actually your own shadow. This is why women seem mysterious, even intimidating to so many men. Not because they're hiding secrets, but because men have never been taught to see the invisible framework of emotional power. Society told men to conquer, to provide, to pursue, but never to understand. And when you don't understand, you project. You turn women into symbols, puzzles, or fantasies instead of meeting them as real human beings. But women, generation after generation, have learned how to live inside this blindness. They navigate it. Sometimes they harness it, not out of malice, but out of survival. Mothers pass wisdom to daughters not in textbooks, but in instincts, whispers, and resilience. Simone de Beauvoir once wrote, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman." That becoming that transformation has always happened inside a structure that rewards silence and punishes confrontation. Silence in this sense is not weakness, it is strategy. And here lies the uncomfortable truth. Many women might not want this conversation to go mainstream, not because it betrays them, but because it names a dynamic that works silently in their favor. Mystique, confusion. The dance of pursuit, all of it loses power once you shine light on it. When power is named, it changes shape. So now we arrive at the paradox. Is this manipulation or is it adaptation? Think of nature. Animals use camouflage not to deceive but to survive. Humans do the same. Roles, masks, strategies, they evolve over centuries. Not every strategy is spoken, but that doesn't mean it isn't real. And this is where Socrates forces us to get uncomfortable. Because he didn't just want answers, he wanted essence. He didn't stop at appearances, he dug for the truth beneath them. And if we follow his example, then the question isn't simply, what do women want? But rather, what assumptions blind me from seeing what's already here? Now let's shift the lens. If silence can be a strategy, then what does that silence actually do inside relationships? Here's something most men miss. Silence is not emptiness. It's language. It's communication without words. Sometimes it's resistance, sometimes it's protection, and often it's power. Think about it. A single look can lift you up or cut you down. A pause in the middle of a heated argument can speak louder than 1,000 shouted words. Feminine power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. And those whispers have been shaping men's families and entire cultures for centuries. Carl Jung's student Erich Fromm described this feminine force as the archetype of transformation, the Great Mother. Not a literal figure, but a symbol of mystery, chaos, nourishment, and danger. To confront the feminine is to confront life itself. Love, death, creation, abandonment. That's why many men fear it. Not because women are dangerous, but because the feminine energy inside them awakens everything they try so hard to control. Now imagine this collision, the internal feminine archetype meeting the real women in your life. Are you relating to them, or are you relating to your projections? This is the hidden trap. Most men aren't actually seeing women as they are. They're seeing reflections of their own unmet needs, their childhood wounds, their longing for comfort or approval. That's why relationships feel confusing, even painful. You're not engaging with the person, you're engaging with your past. This is why Socrates remains so dangerous. He didn't just ask easy questions. He asked the ones that stripped you bare. He'd never settle for women are complicated. He'd ask, what about you makes them feel complicated? What assumptions are you carrying? And when you begin asking those questions of yourself, you start to see the invisible chains you've been dragging. Chains of social scripts, chains of inherited beliefs, chains of seeking validation instead of truth. But here's the insight that can't be ignored. Feminine power is not a trick. It's not some game being played at your expense. It's energy, subtle, emotional, layered. It cannot be controlled, only respected. And until you stop resisting it, it will always feel like chaos. So the choice is clear. You can keep living blind forever, confused by silence, by looks, by contradictions, or you can start to understand the feminine as it truly is, not an enemy, not an idol, but a mirror. A mirror that shows you your own depth, your own fears, your own capacity for presence. And here's the challenge: once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you realize silence is not absence, but influence, you begin to hear everything differently. The question is, are you willing to listen? Let's pause here and look at the bigger picture. Why does this matter so much? Because if you don't understand the invisible structures at play, you'll keep mistaking the symptoms for the cause. You'll think she's pulling away or she's being difficult without realizing that what you're facing is not her rejection, it's your own unawareness. Plato's Symposium gives us a clue. In it, Socrates recounts his dialogue with Diotima, a woman philosopher who taught him that love is not about possession, but about transformation. She described love as a ladder. You start with attraction to the body, then rise to the beauty of the soul, then to the love of knowledge, and finally to the eternal. The point: if you stop climbing, you mistake the first rung for the entire journey. That's why so many relationships collapse. They never move beyond the surface. Now think about your own life. How many times have you confused being wanted with being seen? How often have you mistaken attention for connection? How often have you chased love not because you were ready to give, but because you needed to be filled? These aren't just mistakes. They're signals that you've been living at the bottom of the ladder, never climbing. And here's the hard truth: climbing requires letting go. Letting go of illusions, shallow games, and the need for validation. It requires confronting your own shadows, the parts of you that cling to control, that fear rejection, that demand certainty. That's why love feels so terrifying, because real love doesn't serve your ego. It dissolves it. This is exactly what women often awaken in men, whether consciously or not. They bring out tenderness you hide, fears you bury, and a hunger for meaning you ignore. Not because they're trying to fix you, but because their presence exposes the false layers you build around yourself. And if you resist, you don't just reject the woman, you reject your own evolution. So here's a question that Socrates himself might have asked. Are you brave enough to climb? Are you willing to see love not as comfort, but as transformation? Because the moment you stop asking, what do women want, and start asking, what am I afraid to face within myself, everything changes. And yet most people never get here. They spend their lives circling the same patterns, repeating the same cycles, chasing the same illusions. But you don't have to. You can step off the treadmill and begin to climb. The only question is, will you? Let's take this even further. If love is a ladder, then most of us are stuck on the lower rungs. And what keeps us there isn't a lack of opportunity, it's fear. Fear of being seen, fear of losing control, fear of admitting that what we thought was strength is often just armor. Pause for a second. Have you ever been drawn to someone you couldn't explain? Someone who stirred something ancient inside you, desire, fear, admiration, even discomfort. That wasn't random. That was a soul encounter. It happens because they awaken parts of you you've been avoiding. Sometimes they stay, sometimes they vanish. But either way, they leave a mark. That's not manipulation, that's initiation. Jung described this through the anima, the unconscious feminine living within every man. If you don't face her, she controls you. You'll project her onto real women, chasing them as saviors, resenting them when they fail, and repeating the cycle endlessly. But when you bring that force into awareness, something radical happens. You stop chasing completion outside yourself. You begin to feel whole, and only then can you love not from need, but from truth. Now here's the paradox. Many women won't say this out loud, but they feel it. They can sense when you're performing availability instead of truly being available. They can tell when you're listening with half your presence, waiting to defend yourself instead of absorbing what's being shared. They can feel the mask even when you think you're hiding it well. And when they pull away, it's not because they want to hurt you, it's because they're preserving their own truth. This is why silence, distance, or even rejection can be a deeper form of communication. It's not absence, it's a mirror. It shows you the gap between who you pretend to be and who you really are. And that's why the feminine can feel terrifying, because it doesn't just reflect your charm, your ambition, or your power, it reflects your shadows. So here's the challenge. Can you face that reflection without running? Can you let love dismantle the false self you've been clinging to? Because until you do, every relationship will feel like a battlefield. But once you do, love stops being a struggle and becomes a path. This is what Socrates hinted at all along. He wasn't trying to give answers, he was trying to strip away illusions until only essence remained. And if you're willing, that essence will transform not just your relationships, but your life. Let's look at this through an even sharper lens. The greatest illusions in love aren't created by women. They're created by us, by the scripts we inherited without question. Society told us what it means to be a man: dominate, perform, achieve, conquer. But it said little about listening, reflecting, or seeing beyond appearances. And so we live by a script that praises strength but ignores depth. Ask yourself this: how many times have you chased attention because you mistook it for love? How many times have you stayed in relationships not because they were right, but because they were familiar? Familiarity often feels safe, but what if that safety is just an echo of old wounds? This is the cycle men repeat, mistaking comfort for connection, mistaking performance for presence. Socrates was seen as dangerous not because he had answers, but because he questioned foundations. He would have asked, who gave you this script? Who benefits from you living by it? And why haven't you torn it apart? These questions force us to confront the uncomfortable truth that much of what we call attraction or success is inherited, not chosen. And here's the insight most men never realize: feminine power isn't a game. It's not manipulation, it's energy. Subtle, fluid, intuitive, sometimes chaotic, always alive. From the way a single look can shift your confidence to the silence that forces you to examine yourself, feminine power is less about control and more about revelation. It shows you who you are beneath the performance. But here's the trap. If you resist that revelation, you'll keep blaming women for what you refuse to face in yourself. You'll call them confusing, dramatic, or impossible, when in reality they're reflecting your own unexamined fears. That's why awakening feels so disruptive, because clarity strips away excuses. And once you see, you can no longer pretend you don't know. So the question becomes, are you ready for clarity? Are you willing to step beyond the script society handed you and step into a deeper vision of yourself? Because clarity is not comfortable. It demands responsibility. You can no longer chase shadows, blame others, or hide behind illusions. The moment you embrace this truth, everything begins to shift. Love stops being a game of performance and becomes an invitation to authenticity. And that is the territory few men ever enter. But once you do, there's no turning back. Let's explore what happens when this clarity actually takes root. Imagine living without the constant need to perform. Imagine no longer chasing approval or fearing rejection, but standing steady in who you are. That's the shift men experience when they begin to see the feminine not as a puzzle to solve, but as a mirror reflecting their own truth. In the myth of Psyche and Eros, Psyche is forbidden to look at her lover's face. She is told that love must remain blind. But one night she lights a lamp, gazes at him, and everything changes. Eros awakens, disappears, and Psyche is cast into a long, painful journey to win back what she lost. This isn't just a story about romance, it's a story about awakening. The moment you choose to truly see, illusions shatter, and the journey of transformation begins. That's exactly what happens when men confront the unconscious patterns shaping their relationships. Jung explained this through the anima: if unacknowledged, it dominates your life. You'll keep seeking her outside yourself, idealizing women, resenting them when they don't match the fantasy, and endlessly repeating the cycle. But when you bring that inner feminine into awareness, something profound happens. You no longer need completion outside. You begin to feel whole within, and only then can you love with honesty, not from hunger but from presence, not from fear but from strength. That shift changes everything, because love stops being about possession and becomes about partnership. But here's where most men stumble. Clarity is terrifying. It strips away the comfortable illusions you've lived with your entire life. It forces you to admit that some of your relationships weren't built on love, but on need. It shows you that some of your desires were driven not by truth, but by emptiness. And it demands that you take responsibility for the patterns you've carried. This is why so many resist the feminine. Not because they don't want love, but because they don't want to confront themselves. They fear the mirror. But here's the paradox: the very thing you fear is the doorway to freedom. So ask yourself, are you willing to hold that lamp to see clearly, even if it means losing the fantasy? Because that's where true intimacy begins. Not in blindness, but in vision. Now let's get brutally honest. Most men aren't afraid of women. They're afraid of what women awaken in them. Vulnerability, depth, the feeling of being truly seen. Because when a woman looks at you, not your status, not your achievements, not your mask, but you, there's nowhere left to hide. And that's why the feminine can feel so dangerous. She doesn't care about the stories you tell or the image you polish. She feels your emptiness. She senses your integrity. She knows when you're fully present and when you're performing. And when she tests you, it's not to control you, it's to call you forward. Here's something few will admit: women aren't waiting for perfect men. They're waiting for present men, men who don't collapse when challenged, men who don't shut down when emotions rise, men who can hold space even in the storm. Because the deepest feminine longing isn't to diminish you, it's to be met by you, to be felt, to be heard, to be seen not as a role but as a living mystery. But this is the paradox: when a man tries to conquer a woman, he loses himself. When he meets her, he finds himself. Society trained men to chase power, approval, and performance, but none of those touch the soul. Power without presence is empty. Success without depth is hollow. And relationships without truth are prisons disguised as pleasure. So here's the moment of choice. Do you want comfort or do you want truth? Because truth is not gentle. It burns. It strips away illusions. It breaks the smaller version of yourself so the larger one can emerge. But in those ashes, a different man is born. A man who no longer begs for love, but embodies it. A man who no longer needs to impress, but inspires simply by being. And that's why such a man is rare, and why he's dangerous. Not dangerous because he seeks power over others, but because he can't be manipulated. He sees, he knows, he chooses from awareness. And when he enters a woman's life, he doesn't play games. He doesn't chase approval. He doesn't bow to drama. He meets her fully, fiercely, and truthfully. So here's the real revelation: the feminine doesn't want a slave, and she doesn't want a conqueror. She wants a mirror, a man who reflects her fire, her chaos, her passion, and holds it with unwavering presence. The question is, can you be that mirror? To become that mirror, you must go through fire. Not the fire of external battles, but the fire within the fire that burns away masks, excuses, and illusions. This is why men who embody presence are so rare. They are not created by comfort. They are forged through struggle, loss, and the willingness to confront their own shadows. In the ancient mystery schools, initiation wasn't just about learning facts. It was about death and rebirth. The ego had to die so the soul could emerge. And often this rebirth came through a confrontation with the feminine, not the woman herself, but what she represents: the unknown, the emotional, the irrational, the intuitive. Everything society told men to avoid. Modern culture has forgotten this. It reduces women to stereotypes and reduces men to performers, always proving, always chasing, never resting. But rest is exactly what men need. Not just physical rest, but psychological stillness. The stillness to listen, the stillness to feel, the stillness to witness the feminine without trying to fix her, control her, or fear her. Only from that stillness does real connection begin, because presence cannot be faked. Women, especially those connected to their essence, can feel everything. They know when your smile is a mask. They know when your attention is scattered. They know when you are hiding, and they test you not to shame you, but to see if you can hold the weight of truth. Socrates understood this. That's why he taught through questions, not answers. Answers can be memorized. Questions demand transformation. He wasn't trying to impress people, he was trying to free them. And the same is true here. The question is not, how do I win her? The question is, can I remain present when the storm comes? Because life will test you. Love will test you. Not with riddles, but with moments. When your partner is upset, when your child is afraid, when your plans collapse, do you shut down, attack, or stay steady? Every moment is a choice, not perfection. Presence. And when you choose presence, something profound happens. Relationships stop being battles or performances. They become doorways. Doorways to a deeper kind of intimacy where love is not about possession, but about awakening. That is the initiation. Not into dominance, not into control, but into truth. This is the moment where everything you thought you knew gets tested, because the world has trained you to value control over connection, performance, over presence, comfort over truth. But truth doesn't care about your comfort. Truth is fire. It burns away illusions until only what's real remains. Here's the paradox. The deeper feminine isn't waiting for you to conquer her. She isn't waiting for you to play the role of provider, protector, or savior. She's waiting for you to meet her not with bravado, but with presence. Not with dominance, but with depth. And presence cannot be faked. It comes only from a man who has walked through his own shadows and come out whole, not bitter, not broken, but real. That's why such men are rare. They can't be manufactured by culture, by money, or by status. They are shaped by fire. And once they emerge, they're no longer trapped by games of validation or approval. They don't need to impress, they simply are. That's what makes them magnetic. That's what makes them unshakable. And here's what many women feel, but rarely say: they are not waiting for perfect men, they're waiting for present men. Men who do not run when intimacy becomes raw. Men who do not crumble when emotions rise. Men who do not hide when they are truly seen. Because the deepest feminine longing is not for safety in the shallow sense, it's for authenticity. to be felt, to be mirrored, to be met in full. But that authenticity demands a price. It requires you to stop pretending, to stop chasing illusions, to stop hiding behind the mask society handed you. It means letting the smaller version of yourself die so the truer version can live. And yes, that death is painful. But in its ashes, a different man is born, a man who doesn't just read about philosophy, but lives it. That man is dangerous not because he controls others, but because he cannot be controlled. He sees, he knows, he chooses from awareness. And when he meets a woman, he doesn't shrink from her fire. He holds it, he honors it, he mirrors it back steady and unafraid. So now the question is no longer, what do women want? The real question is, are you willing to become the man who can meet what they awaken? We've come to the final stretch, and this is where everything converges. Up until now, we've peeled back layers of illusion about love, about women, about power. But here's the ultimate truth. The feminine is not a puzzle to decode. It is not an enemy to resist or an idol to worship. It is a force, a field, an intelligence that calls you to awaken. And here's the uncomfortable part. Most men aren't afraid of women. They're afraid of what women awaken inside them. Vulnerability, presence, depth. Because when a woman truly sees you, there's nowhere left to hide. She doesn't care about your titles or trophies. She feels your integrity. She senses your emptiness. She knows when you're present and when you're not. That's why the feminine can be terrifying, because it demands that you show up as your whole self. Socrates taught that the greatest wisdom is knowing your own ignorance. That strength is not in dominating others, but in mastering yourself. And this is exactly the invitation the feminine offers, not submission, not conquest, but evolution. To rise into a man who no longer plays games, who no longer begs for validation, who no longer hides behind performance. Here's the paradox: when you try to conquer the feminine, you lose yourself. When you meet it, you find yourself. And in that meeting, love stops being about possession and becomes transformation. Intimacy stops being about bodies and becomes about souls. Relationships stop being cages and become sacred spaces of growth. So now the choice is yours. You can return to the old scripts, keep chasing approval, keep hiding behind illusions, keep living half asleep. Or you can begin the inner revolution, the revolution of presence, of living awake, of meeting life love, and the feminine with open eyes and steady heart. Because here's the truth women rarely say, but every one of them feels they are not waiting for you to be perfect. They are waiting for you to be present, and presence is something no one can give you and no one can take away. It is yours to claim. So ask yourself, will you stay in the comfort of performance, or will you step into the fire of truth? Will you remain asleep, or will you awaken to the life that has been calling you all along? The door to that awakening is open, but only the brave ever walk through it.